a machine spinning at nearly 100,000 revolutions per minute. Its only purpose? To separate two atoms that are almost identical. This is the real machine behind the rising tensions in the Middle East. What you are looking at is a centrifuge, a device that performs a process called uranium enrichment, crucial for creating weapons-grade uranium. Building such a machine is not easy. For decades, only a few nations had this capability. So, how did Iran get it? The answer lies in one of the most dangerous spy networks the world has ever seen. Iran acquired this technology decades ago and has been running it ever since. But if that is old news, then why is it a global crisis now? What new red line, according to Israel, has Iran crossed? That is a question many are asking right now. What exactly is enrichment? How does a centrifuge actually work? Where did Iran get this technology? Is it possible to build a nuclear weapon without enrichment? And can 10 nuclear bombs really be made from Iran's stockpile in just 10 days? Let us find out in this video. Hi friends, welcome to a new video from Science Simplified for All. This video explores the scientific and technical aspects and stages involved when a country attempts to develop a nuclear weapon and the countermeasures taken by other nations to stop it. Since the topic is about nuclear weapons, a certain amount of history and international politics will naturally come into the discussion. That cannot be avoided. However, this video does not take a stance on whether any country's position is right or wrong. The goal is to present the positions that different nations have taken. Nothing more. Also, this video does not reveal any kind of classified information. Now, let us begin. Throughout history, there has rarely been a direct military invasion of any country that possesses nuclear weapons. This global fear of nuclear weapons is one of the main reasons why some countries are motivated to develop their own. But as the number of nuclear-armed nations increases, so does the risk of actual use. That is why the United Nations and the international community generally adopt a policy of preventing any new country from acquiring nuclear weapons. Developing a nuclear weapon from scratch is an extremely complex task, and doing it while staying under the radar of international watchdogs is even harder. The first step in that journey is acquiring the nuclear fuel needed to build the bomb. In one of our earlier videos, we discussed that there are mainly two types of nuclear weapons. The first is based on nuclear fission, releasing energy by splitting the nucleus of large atoms. The second is nuclear fusion, releasing energy by combining the nuclei of smaller atoms. Fission-based bombs are commonly known as atomic bombs, while fusion-based ones are called hydrogen bombs or thermonuclear bombs. Among these, atomic bombs based on nuclear fission are relatively easier to build. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were of this type. That is why any country attempting to develop nuclear weapons for the first time usually tries to make an atomic bomb. The materials suitable for nuclear fission are called fissile materials. Only a few elements can actually undergo fission effectively. Today, the two most commonly used fissile materials are uranium-235 and plutonium-239. Which of these materials a country chooses to use for building a bomb usually depends on its natural resources and geopolitical situation. Let us first look at uranium. The isotope of uranium used as fissile material is uranium-235. However, most of the uranium found in nature is U-238. Natural uranium contains only about 0.7% of U-235, which is the fissile part. That means the uranium we get from nature cannot be directly used to make an atomic bomb. The U-235 must first be separated out and concentrated before it can be used. Normally, to separate one element from another, we rely on chemical reactions. But in this case, we are not trying to separate two different elements. We are trying to separate two isotopes of the same element. Both U-235 and U-238 are isotopes of the same element uranium. And because of that, they have identical chemical properties. So chemical methods cannot be used to separate them. The only difference between the two is that U-235 is slightly lighter in mass than U-238. That tiny difference in mass is the only thing we can use to separate them, and that requires complex physical processes. In fact, we are not truly separating the isotopes. Instead, we gradually increase the percentage of U-235 in natural uranium through a series of special stages. This entire process is known as enrichment. It is one of the most crucial stages in building a nuclear weapon, but enrichment is also extremely technically challenging and time-consuming. Despite this, countries like Iran still prefer using uranium as their nuclear fuel, and there is a clear reason for that. Before we explore that reason, we need to understand the advantages and challenges of the other major option for nuclear fuel, plutonium. The fissile isotope of plutonium is Pu-239. In fact, plutonium-239 is technically better suited for making an atomic bomb than uranium-235. That is because it has a lower critical mass. In simple terms, a smaller amount of plutonium is needed to create a bomb compared to uranium. Moreover, plutonium can be extracted using chemical processes. There is no need for the complex and slow physical processes required for uranium enrichment. This is why most major nuclear powers, like the United States and Russia, use plutonium-based fission devices in their weapons. But there is one major drawback. Plutonium is not a naturally occurring element. Unlike uranium, which can be mined from the earth, plutonium must be created artificially. Earlier, we mentioned about uranium-238, the non-fissile isotope that makes up most of natural uranium. Under specific conditions, when U-238 absorbs a neutron, it undergoes a series of internal changes and transforms into plutonium-239. This is how plutonium used in nuclear weapons is typically produced. However, the large number of free neutrons required for this process are available only inside a working nuclear reactor. So without a reactor, producing plutonium is simply not possible. The uranium fuel used in a reactor contains both uranium-235 and uranium-238. Fission occurs mostly in U-235, but at the same time, a significant portion of the U-238 inside the reactor absorbs neutrons and converts into plutonium-239. Once the usable U-235 in the fuel is depleted, that fuel becomes nuclear waste. This waste contains many highly radioactive fission products, but it also contains plutonium-239. And since plutonium is an entirely different element, it can be extracted from the waste using chemical processes. No complicated or slow physical methods are needed. So, at first glance, it may seem like plutonium is the better option for making atomic bombs. But this is exactly where political complications begin to arise. For a country trying to independently develop an atom bomb, building a nuclear reactor is even more difficult than building the bomb itself. Now, imagine that such a country acquires a nuclear reactor from a developed nation under the pretext of generating electricity. The fuel used in that reactor, once spent, must either be returned to the supplier country or stored safely under strict conditions. Extracting plutonium from that spent fuel will not be permitted. In fact, such nuclear waste will remain under continuous international surveillance. Even if a country manages to secretly build its own reactor and then tries to extract plutonium from the resulting waste fuel, that process would require a massive reprocessing facility. Handling spent nuclear fuel is extremely hazardous as it contains highly radioactive waste products. Operating such a facility without drawing international attention is extremely difficult. Global non-proliferation agencies are very likely to detect it. Unlike a few special reactor types, regular nuclear reactors do not use plutonium as fuel. So if a country is producing plutonium, it is easy for the international community to suspect that the real intention is to build nuclear weapons. That brings immense political pressure and global sanctions, both from the United Nations and other nations. In short, plutonium is not available from any natural source. Plutonium reprocessing plants cannot be easily hidden from international monitoring agencies, and apart from making bombs, there is no other convincing peaceful excuse for producing plutonium. This is why most countries attempting to develop nuclear weapons prefer uranium over plutonium as their fuel. One of the key advantages of uranium is that although the enrichment process is technically challenging, enrichment facilities require relatively less space. This makes it easier to conceal them from other countries. Enrichment can even be carried out inside secure underground bunkers. In such cases, the chances of an enemy nation identifying and destroying the facility are much lower. Another major advantage is that uranium is not only used for making bombs, it also has many peaceful applications. Countries can always claim that their enrichment program is intended for peaceful purposes, such as producing fuel for nuclear reactors or for medical uses. In such situations, neither the United Nations nor other global powers can completely block enrichment activities. At most, they can demand periodic inspections of such facilities. In short, it is not just technical factors, but mainly political considerations that drive most emerging nuclear powers to rely on uranium over plutonium. And there is one more advantage uranium has over plutonium. Plutonium can only be used in an implosion-type nuclear device, which is far more difficult to design and build. Uranium, on the other hand, can be used in simpler gun-type nuclear weapons, like the one dropped on Hiroshima. These are much easier to construct. So, once weapon-grade uranium is obtained through enrichment, building an actual atom bomb is not that difficult. Now let us look at the technical aspects of uranium enrichment. There are mainly two methods used for enriching uranium. In the early days, a technique called gas diffusion was used. In fact, the uranium used in the little boy bomb dropped on Hiroshima was enriched using this method. Today, however, the most widely used technology for uranium enrichment is the centrifuge, the same device you saw at the beginning of this video. As we discussed earlier, naturally occurring uranium contains about 99.3% U-238 and only 0.7% U-235, the fissile isotope needed for bombs. The first step is to convert this uranium into a gaseous form called uranium hexafluoride. This gas is then fed into a rapidly spinning cylinder. Inside the spinning cylinder, the gas experiences intense centrifugal force. Because U-238 atoms are slightly heavier, they tend to move outward toward the walls of the cylinder. The lighter U-235 atoms, on the other hand, tend to stay closer to the center. This process does not create a sharp separation between the two isotopes, but it does create a small gradient in concentration. The gas near the center becomes just slightly richer in U-235 than the gas near the edge. If we extract the gas from the center region, it will have a U-235 concentration just a little higher than 0.7%. Now, this slightly enriched gas is sent into another spinning cylinder, where the process is repeated. Each stage increases the U-235 concentration by a small amount. Repeating this process hundreds or even thousands of times gradually raises the U-235 content to the desired level. As you might have guessed by now, this is a very slow and repetitive process. And to achieve a meaningful level of enrichment, a large number of centrifuges are required. The most technically challenging part of this entire process is the design of the centrifuge itself. The spinning cylinder inside the centrifuge rotates at speeds of up to 100,000 revolutions per minute. During this high-speed rotation, uranium hexafluoride gas has to be continuously fed into and out of the cylinder without disrupting its motion. The cylinder is typically supported by a needle bearing at the bottom and a magnetic bearing at the top. With only these 2 points of support, even the slightest imbalance can cause the centrifuge to fail catastrophically. That is why designing and manufacturing such a machine is so technically demanding. In the early days, only a few countries possessed the expertise and technology required to build such centrifuges. But eventually, this technology leaked to other nations, and behind that leak lies one of the most notorious spy stories in the history of nuclear proliferation. Since this is a science video, we will not go into all the details. But here is a brief summary. A prominent Pakistani scientist who worked at a European uranium enrichment company secretly took the designs and blueprints for these centrifuges back to Pakistan. That scientist would later become known as the father of Pakistan's nuclear weapons program, Abdul Qadir Khan. It is now widely believed that Dr. A.Q. Khan shared this technology with multiple countries, possibly for financial gain. There is substantial documentation suggesting that centrifuge technology was transferred to Iran, Libya, and North Korea through his network. Of these, North Korea is now generally recognized as a country that has developed nuclear weapons capabilities. Libya initially pursued a nuclear program but later abandoned it under international pressure, dismantling its enrichment facilities under the supervision of international atomic energy agencies. It was through Libya that the global community first uncovered the full scope of Dr. Khan's network. Khan himself later acknowledged many of these activities in public statements to the media. There are also unconfirmed reports indicating that similar technology may have been offered to countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Malaysia. It is widely believed that the original design of the centrifuges used in Iran's enrichment plants came from Dr. Khan's network. Iran may have further refined and improved that design over time. Today, Iran is known to use more advanced centrifuges in its enrichment facilities. Uranium enrichment is typically done in multiple stages. Naturally occurring uranium contains only 0.7% uranium-235. The first stage of enrichment increases this concentration to around 3 to 5%, which is sufficient for use in nuclear power reactors. The next stage is 20% enrichment, which is generally used for medical purposes, such as producing isotopes for cancer treatment or diagnostic imaging. Since all these are peaceful, civilian uses, international agencies cannot legally object to a country enriching uranium up to 20%. However, only a very small quantity of uranium is needed for medical applications. So, if a country enriches much more uranium than needed, international watchdogs can raise concerns. And that is precisely the case with Iran. They have already enriched far more uranium than what would be required for medical purposes. The next stage is enrichment from 20% to 60%. Although this level is still not yet weapon grade, there is no peaceful justification for enriching uranium to 60%. That is why, if any country tries to go beyond 20%, international agencies will intervene and try to stop it. Iran is a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, which explicitly prohibits it from enriching uranium beyond 20% under any circumstance. But Iran has attempted to cross this limit multiple times in the past. Due to severe international pressure and sanctions, Iran had previously halted enrichment beyond 20%. However, by 2021, it was confirmed that Iran had resumed enrichment up to 60%. The next step beyond 60% is 90% enrichment, which qualifies as weapon-grade uranium. The critical issue is this: as the percentage of enrichment increases, the technical difficulty and time required decreases. In fact, the most challenging and time-consuming part of the entire enrichment process is reaching 20%. Going from 20% to 60% is relatively easier, and from 60% to 90% is even easier still. Moreover, the same centrifuges used to reach 20% enrichment can be reused for the higher stages as well. All that is needed is to run the gas through the same centrifuges repeatedly, stage by stage. According to Israeli estimates, Iran may currently possess enough 60% enriched uranium to potentially build around 10 nuclear bombs if further enriched. The remaining step, from 60% to 90% enrichment, which is weapon grade, would take only about 8 to 10 days. That is why Israel claims it had to launch a sudden military strike. Israel follows a long-standing policy of preventing adversaries from acquiring weapons of mass destruction. This policy is known as the Begin Doctrine. It was under this doctrine that the recent airstrikes were carried out. Several of Iran's nuclear facilities were reportedly destroyed in the attack. However, the Fordow underground facility was considered one of Iran's most secure nuclear sites. It could not be destroyed by a normal airstrike. That is why the United States had to use the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP, a powerful bunker-busting bomb, against the Fordow facility. The operation was carried out using the famous B-2 Spirit bombers. This marks a significant escalation in the events, as it confirms that the United States has now directly entered the conflict, at least militarily. So far, these are the developments we know. Through this video, we explored how uranium enrichment works, how it contributes to the development of nuclear capabilities, and the global efforts to monitor and regulate such advancements. While recent geopolitical developments were included for context, our intent is purely educational, focused on the underlying science and technology. This video does not aim to support or criticize the actions of any particular country. If you found this video informative, please consider liking it. Your comments are always welcome, and do share it with friends who might be interested in science and global affairs. Thank you.